Stop being a coward, Denise. It's just a pinhole, and we'll fix it next turnaround. Troy Vance threw it across the hydro treater deck at 5:42, sharp enough to cut through fan noise and steam hiss, loud enough that the board operator in the analyzer shelter turned his head, and the scaffold crew on the exchanger bank went quiet on their radios. He did not just challenge her judgment. He staged her humiliation in front of the people who usually trusted her call before they trusted any spreadsheet from the admin building. 43 minutes later, E417 would open at the shell seam and turn a rate push into a unit emergency. But at 0542, the damage was social first. Authority trying to label caution as weakness. In plants like this, that label was not just an insult, it was a pressure tool. Denise Lewis stood in flame-resistant coveralls with a clipboard tucked under one arm and her gas meter clipped high on her chest. She felt the vibration of the deck through her boots. Low and steady, the familiar thrum of circulation pumps, feeding a process that only stayed routine when every layer held. She kept her voice level anyway because her team listened for tone as much as content. "It is not a pinhole," she said. "It is active leakage at a repaired seam in hydrogen service. That is a different category." Vance gave a short laugh, all teeth and no humor. "Different category. You hear this?" He looked past her to the scaffold foreman as if asking for backup from a man who was not even in operations. Obsolete operator superstition dressed up in big words. The foreman looked down at his glove seams and said nothing. The board operator, Malik, stayed by the shelter door with his headset around his neck, eyes moving from Denise to Vance and back again. Denise did not answer immediately. She had learned years ago that arguing fast gave people like Troy room to call her emotional. She turned one page on her clipboard, found the red tag number she had written 23 minutes earlier, and held it where he could see it. Tag 91-HT-447, equipment E-417 shell side. Condition: weeping crack at prior weld repair. Supporting indicators: differential pressure up 17% from baseline. Vibration alarm over normal envelope. I logged all three. Vance did not look at the tag. "You logged panic." He stepped closer, invading her space with the polished confidence of someone who spent more time in budget reviews than in sulfur-laced dawn air. His hard hat looked new, the reflective strip still glossy. No grease on the brim, no sun fade. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you're lazy when quarter end hits. Every single time we need throughput, you find a reason to baby the unit." The word landed harder than coward. Coward attacked nerve. Lazy attacked identity. Denise had built 16 years on the opposite of lazy. Winter turnarounds that ran 36-hour stretches. Startup nights, when alarms stacked like dominoes. Freeze events where she and two mechanics kept heat tracing alive by hand-checking lines in sleet. She had trained half the younger operators Vance now called agile talent. She also knew this was exactly why he chose the word in public. If he could stain her reputation in 1 minute, he could make the next unsafe order sound reasonable. By 5:10 that morning, before most managers arrived, she had already completed her pre-shift walk on the hot side, checked furnace bridge wall temperature trend, and confirmed no hydrocarbon hits on portable detection around the feed effluent exchangers. At 5:18, she reached E417 and paused, because the sound pattern was wrong. Not just machine noise, but a thin metallic flutter riding above it. Acoustic vibration monitors had limits for a reason. Metal talked before it failed. E417 sat in the second exchanger train. Horizontal shell and tube, carbon steel shell, with a prior repair band on the south seam from a turnaround 3 years back. In normal operation, it recovered heat from reactor effluent into incoming feed, which meant high thermal stress, pressure cycling, and hydrogen exposure all day. In plain language, zero room for wishful thinking. She checked the local differential gauge first. The needle sat higher than it had during her last 4 shifts. Not catastrophic on its own, but wrong in context. Fouling on the tube side raised delta P. Raised delta P forced higher velocity through partial pathways. Higher velocity plus existing vibration meant cyclic stress. Cyclic stress at a repaired weld was not a maybe. It was a clock. Then she saw the stain. The leak was thin, more weep than spray. But chloride residue had dried in a fan shape around the seam, pale gray against heat-darkened paint. At the center was a narrow wet line, barely wider than a wire. The patch from the last repair had a discolored edge, where insulation had trapped moisture at some point. She held the back of her gloved hand near it and felt pulsing warmth through radiant heat, a pattern that matched pressure breathing. She keyed her radio. Board field. Malik answered at once. Go ahead, Denise. Pull live trend on E417 differential and shell vibration. Last hour and last 8. 2 seconds of static. Stand by. While he pulled data, she took photos from 3 angles with the intrinsically safe camera, included asset tag and frame, then set a red marker tag at eye level on the ladder cage. Her handwriting stayed block printed and boring by design. No drama words, only condition and status. Red tag meant no one could honestly claim they did not know. Malik came back on. You're not going to like this. Delta P up in steps since 0426. Vibration hit amber twice, now red for 40 seconds, then dropped back to amber. Log it, she said. Timestamp everything. I'm writing it too. Already in shift log. She took a breath, then another, tasting hot metal and faint amine carryover from the neighboring unit. I am calling operations manager. Keep rate where it is. Do not increase feed. Copy. That call to Vance at 5:31 lasted 44 seconds. He told her he was on his way and asked with annoyance already in his tone whether this was another one of your conservative calls. She answered yes because conservative was the wrong word for what she did. Precise was better. But she said yes anyway to keep him moving. Now, at 5:42, he had arrived with his verdict prepared. Malik took 2 cautious steps forward. Troy, trend is not clean. We should at least hold. Vance cut him off with one raised palm. I am not taking operating advice from a shelter chair and a ghost story technician. Denise felt the heat rise in her neck. The involuntary flush she hated because it looked like embarrassment, even when it was anger. She looked at the seam. Then she looked at Troy. The old toolbox line moved through her mind. The one younger techs teased her for repeating until they needed it. My name is Denise Lewis. I make $148,000 a year because I catch failures before they become funerals. She had said that line in safety meetings because money, in this business, often became the only language management respected. They did not pay that salary for charm. They paid it for pattern recognition under pressure. She met Troy's eyes. Read the red tag. He did not move. Read it, she repeated. Instead, he smiled with that thin managerial patience that usually came just before a threat. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to stop performing for the scaffolders, clear the permit notes, and let us run the unit. Turnaround is in 5 weeks. We patch it then. Today we hit target. From the catwalk above, someone dropped a wrench into a canvas bucket. The thud echoed between exchanger shells like a muted drumbeat. A relief valve chattered somewhere on the far side of the unit and receded. The whole plant seemed to listen. Denise could map the causality in her head faster than he could finish a sentence. Feed push increased thermal load. Fouling constricted flow. Constricted flow drove velocity spikes and pressure oscillation. Oscillation coupled with vibration and a weakened heat-affected zone at old weld metal. Add hydrogen at temperature, and ductility dropped where you needed it most. The seam would not argue, it would separate. She kept her words plain. If we continue at this rate, we are gambling with a damaged pressure boundary. He leaned in again. You keep saying we. You mean me. Own your fear. It is not fear. It is, he said. Cowardice in technical language. Malik shifted his weight, gaze fixed on the deck grating. The scaffold foreman quietly told his crew to hold position. No one wanted to be seen leaving, and no one wanted to be seen staying too close. That was the real texture of industrial intimidation. 30 people acting normal while one unsafe decision hardened in public. Denise felt, for a brief second, the old temptation to soften the message. She could have offered a compromise phrase, could have said monitor closely, and bought herself a quieter morning. She knew exactly how that script ended. Someone else's name in an incident report. Someone else's family getting a call after sunset, so she did the opposite of softening. This is a red tag condition, she said. I am recording that I recommended immediate derate and equipment isolation pending integrity review. Vance's expression flattened. Record whatever helps you sleep. He turned half away from her and raised his voice for the deck to hear again, making sure the hierarchy was unmistakable. We are done with this drama. Anyone not interested in production can step aside. Denise watched him, watched the confidence that came from title and bonus structure, and the assumption that consequences arrived for other people. She also watched the seam glisten once, faintly, where the crack breathed under load. In that instant, the conflict stopped being technical. Data had already answered. Procedure had already answered. Physics had already voted. The only unresolved question was who would sign their name next to the warning, and who would pretend not to read it. Denise unhooked the radio from her vest, keyed the transmit button, and spoke slowly enough that every syllable would survive playback. Board field. Mark this as a standing safety objection. E417 remains red tagged. No feed increase authorized from field. Malik answered at once, his tone tighter than before. Copied. Logging as standing objection at 0543. Troy heard it and gave a dry laugh, but he did not interrupt. He was watching her now the way managers watched paperwork, not equipment, calculating what could be reframed later. She clipped the radio back to her vest and moved toward the exchanger ladder, forcing herself to keep a deliberate pace. Running looked like panic. Panic was exactly the label he wanted. The deck grating vibrated under her boots in a rhythm she knew by heart. Circulation pump pulse, fan harmonics, and beneath both of those a rougher tremor that did not belong. The The sound profile had shifted since her first round. Not dramatically, not to an untrained ear, but enough that her jaw set before she reached the shell. By 5:45, first light had started to bleed over the western tanks, turning steam plumes pale gray against the pipe rack. She stopped at the ladder cage and did the sequence she had drilled into every trainee for years. Eyes, ears, instrument, confirm. Eyes first. The weep line on the repaired seam had lengthened by maybe 2 inches since 0518, still narrow, still intermittent, but now pulsing with pressure fluctuations in short breaths. A chalky chloride halo outlined the crack path where insulation had held moisture against carbon steel, and the old repair band looked darker around the toe of the weld. Ears second. The metallic flutter was now punctuated by a low buzz, like a steel ruler vibrating on a table edge. Instrument third. She raised her intrinsically safe thermal imager and scanned the seam from north saddle to south nozzle. The screen showed a hot streak tracking the repaired section, 10 to 14 degrees above adjacent shell metal. Not from process alone, but from frictional turbulence and thinning wall. Eli Navarro came up behind her with a handheld vibration meter and a notepad, breathing hard from climbing 2 stair flights. "You called for me?" She nodded without looking away from the shell. "Take a reading at the south support bracket and at the midpoint near the repair band. Same orientation, same contact pressure. Don't chase the number. Capture it clean." Eli crouched by the bracket, pressed the probe, waited, and read aloud. "Point A, 11.6 millimeters per second RMS. Again, 11.9. She watched his hands. They were steady, but his eyes kept sliding toward Troy at the edge of the deck. "Midpoint." He shifted and placed the probe on the shell skirt. The meter chirped once and displayed red. 15.3. Denise held out her hand. He passed her the device. She repeated the same measurement herself, bracing one glove against hot lagging to stabilize the probe. 15.4. She did it a third time to eliminate handling error. 15.2. She gave Eli the meter back. "Write all 3. Add operator repeat verification." Troy called from behind them, voice carrying over the fan bank. "Are we filming a documentary or are we making diesel?" Denise ignored him and keyed her radio again. "Board, pull live differential pressure across E417 and read current plus 30-minute trend slope." Static cracked. Then Malik came back. "Current delta P is 2.8 bar. Baseline this shift should be 2.2. Slope increased after 0426. Last 10 minutes steeper. Red shell vibration trend from fixed sensor. Fixed sensor crossed red threshold at 0538 for 43 seconds. Dropped amber, now climbing again. Current is red." She looked at Eli. "You heard that." He nodded once. Troy stepped closer, boots ringing against the grating. "You are stacking numbers to justify a slowdown." She finally turned to face him. "No, I am documenting a failure pattern. 3 indicators linked in real time. Rising delta P, sustained vibration over threshold, and active leak at prior weld repair. That combination means degraded pressure boundary." He waved a hand toward the crack as if swatting a fly. "That is a stain. It is weeping process fluid from a repaired seam in hot hydrogen service. It is a pinhole. It is crack propagation. Same thing. It is not the same thing." Her voice stayed level, but she spoke louder so Malik and Eli could hear each word. "A pinhole in stable metal can be managed under strict controls. A crack at a heat-affected weld with vibration and pressure cycling is a dynamic defect. Dynamic defects grow. Troy's jaw tightened. You like that word. Dynamic. Makes you sound academic. She crouched by the seam and pointed to the damp line with the capped end of her marker, keeping her hand clear of the leak path. See this spacing in the residue? These are pulse marks, pressure breathing. The crack opens microscopically under load and closes when the cycle eases. That means the defect is not dormant. Eli shifted his weight, staring at the seam. I can see the pulse. Troy snapped at him. What you can see is two people trying to shut down quarter end. Denise stood and faced Eli directly, not Troy. Confirm what you observed. Eli swallowed. Weep line is active and pulsing. Vibration readings above normal, fixed sensor in red. Thank you. Troy gave a clipped laugh. Fantastic. 2 votes for fear. Denise keyed her radio again. Board. Initiate condition report draft. Category. Immediate integrity risk. Asset E417. Attached trend screenshots and red sensor history. Malik hesitated only a moment. Drafting now. Troy took a step toward her, voice dropping. Cancel that call. She did not move. Negative. This is not your authority. Field hazard identification is my authority. He pointed at her clipboard. You want authority? I can remove your sign-off by lunch. She let the words pass, then turned back to the exchanger and ran her gloved palm an inch from the lagging to feel radiant variation along the repair band. Heat intensified in one patch near the lower quadrant where condensate often collected under insulation. Moisture under insulation was never just a maintenance annoyance. With chloride present, it accelerated corrosion at the exact place weld metallurgy was already altered. She wrote one line on her pad in block letters. QI suspected at repair toe, south lower quadrant. Verify with UT at safe state. Troy glanced at her note and scoffed. Now we are inventing hidden corrosion. Not inventing. Inferring from residue pattern, temperature streak, and location history. He crossed his arms. Inference is not evidence. She held up the camera and took another close photo with scale marker in frame. This is evidence. Sensor trend is evidence. Recorded readings are evidence. Your order will be evidence too. For the first time, he stopped talking. Malik's voice came through the radio, quieter now. Denise, board here. Outlet temperature from E417 is starting to oscillate 2 to 3 degrees every few seconds. Not normal smoothing. She answered without looking away from Troy. Log oscillation amplitude and frequency. Do not mask it with averaging. Logged. Eli spoke carefully as if each word had to pass a checkpoint. Could fouling be channeling flow on tube side? Denise nodded. Yes. Fouling narrows passages. Velocity spikes in open tubes. That creates local turbulence and pressure pulsation. Pulsation excites mechanical vibration. Vibration loads weak weld toes, cycle after cycle. Add hydrogen at temperature. Ductility drops and damage microstructure. The seam loses tolerance and tears. Eli looked back at the shell, and the lesson became real in his face. So delta P is not just efficiency loss. Correct. In this case, it is a stress multiplier. Troy cut in. You're giving a classroom speech on my deck. She met his eyes. I am giving the mechanism in plain language so no one says later they did not understand. He stepped to the rail and looked down toward the process road, where a maintenance cart idled near the stair tower. Maintenance is already stretched. Spare train prep will cost hours. Derating costs less than rupture. He turned back sharply. You keep jumping to catastrophe. I am reading the trend line. He took out his phone, thumb moving fast, likely composing instructions before anyone above him heard her report first. Denise had seen that move before. Shape the narrative upstream while Field still gathered facts. She keyed the radio. Board notify shift superintendent that Field has a red tag objection and recommends immediate derate pending integrity review. Malik answered, Copy. Sending now. Troy moved fast enough to close half the distance between them. Do not escalate this beyond shift. She did not flinch. It is already beyond shift. Eli looked between them, then at the seam, then back to his notepad. He wrote anyway. A thin chirp sounded from the fixed vibration transmitter mounted near the shell support. Amber had become a sustained red tone, not loud, but persistent, the kind of alarm people started filtering out when schedule pressure was high. Denise hated that human adaptation more than the noise itself. Alarm fatigue was culture-turning warning into wallpaper. She walked to the transmitter housing and checked the local indicator. Red LED steady. She pressed the acknowledge button to silence the local chirp and left the red light active. Silencing noise was acceptable. Silencing status was not. Local confirmed red, she said into the radio. Do not clear remotely. Malik replied, Remote still red. No clear. Troy rubbed the bridge of his nose, then tried a different tone, less hostile, almost conversational. Denise, listen. We are 42,000 barrels short on quarter plan. Corporate is on me. If we cut rate now, we miss guidance, and every contractor on site feels it next month. I need you to be practical. Practical? She had heard that word used to justify every shortcut that later became a case study. Practical is controlled risk, she said. This is uncontrolled escalation. He exhaled hard. Give me something. Half hour at current rate while we line up the spare. She shook her head. No. 15 minutes. No. He stared at her, then at Eli, then at the seam. For a brief moment, his expression shifted from contempt to calculation to something like unease. The recognition that instruments were now backing the person he had just tried to belittle. Then he put the mask back on. Fine, he said. We will verify with one more data point. She narrowed her eyes. What data point? He pointed toward the panel shelter. Feed bump test, small increase, see if vibration actually responds. Denise felt a hard knot form under her ribs. Absolutely not. That is a provocation test on compromised equipment. It is diagnostics. It is loading damage to prove damage exists. He spread his hands. Science. Recklessness. Eli spoke up, voice thin. If we bump feed and it responds, doesn't that confirm coupling? Denise turned to him. Yes. It confirms coupling by stressing the defect in real time. You do that on healthy equipment under controlled study, not on a leaking repaired seam with red vibration and rising delta P. Troy's face hardened again. You are obstructing operations. I am applying procedure. He pointed toward the shelter. Board will run the bump. She keyed the radio before he could say more. Board, do not execute any feed increase test on E417. Field safety objection remains active. Malik came back, strained. Understood. Holding current set point pending superintendent response. Troy stared at her radio, as if he could will it silent. You realize what you're doing? Yes, she said. preserving evidence and people. The fixed sensor chirped once more before settling into that steady red glow. Steam drifted across the deck, carrying the sharp metallic smell of hot insulation and a faint hydrocarbon note that should not have been there in open air. Denise took one more photo of the seam, one more of the sensor, one more of Eli's handwritten readings beside the asset tag. Then she placed all 3 image IDs in her log and wrote the line that mattered most in block print, so no scanner could misread it later. Unsafe to increase load. Recommend derate. Isolate. Integrity hold point. When she capped her pen, Troy was still standing 3 meters away, silent now, phone in hand, watching the red light burn on the transmitter like a verdict nobody wanted and nobody could honestly deny. The red LED reflected in Troy's safety glasses as if the transmitter itself were accusing him. And Denise saw him decide that the light was the problem, not the equipment behind it. He lifted his chin toward the panel shelter and spoke without taking his eyes off her. Malik, clear that alarm and run the bump. 1%. We are done debating. Denise keyed her radio before the board operator could answer. Countermand. No bump test authorized from field. Red tag objection is active under integrity protocol. Static cracked in the pause. Then Malik answered in a voice that sounded pulled tight. Board copy, holding set point. Troy pivoted toward her, expression flat, with controlled anger. You do not outrank me. I do not need to outrank you to refuse an unsafe instruction, she said. I need a leaking seam, a red vibration alarm, and a process that punishes denial. We already have all 3. He took 2 steps closer. You are making this theatrical. She shook her head once. No, I am making it explicit. If feed goes up, tube side velocity goes up in the channels that are still open. That pushes pulsation amplitude. Pulsation feeds vibration. Vibration cycles the repair toe. In hot hydrogen service, a fatigued, heat-affected zone can unzip. That is mechanism, not theater. Eli stood half a pace behind her shoulder, not speaking, holding the notepad like it weighed 10 pounds. Troy pointed at him. You hear this? She's trying to scare you with jargon? Denise turned to Eli and slowed her voice. No jargon. Think of a paper clip. Bend it once, nothing. Bend it 100 times, it snaps at the weak spot. The vibration is the bending. The weak spot is the weld repair. Feed increase is faster bending. Eli's eyes moved to the seam and stayed there. Understood. Troy gave a short, sharp laugh. Paperclip analogies on a hydro-treater deck. Remarkable. Denise did not look away from him. You asked for practical. This is practical. Derate by 18%, shift duty to the spare train, isolate E417, issue emergent repair code, get integrity to UT-map wall thickness, then decide next step with real data. We do not have the spare train fully lined. Then line it. We do not have maintenance bandwidth this minute. Then hold rate until you do. He spread his hands as if explaining something to a stubborn child. Quarter end does not wait for your comfort. This is not comfort, she said. This is survivability. The wind shifted across the deck, carrying a sharper hydrocarbon note from the seam area. Denise felt it at the back of her throat and watched Eli's nostrils flare as he noticed it too. She clipped her radio back to her vest and stepped to the ladder cage, checking the red tag was still secure and visible at eye level. It fluttered once in the hot draft and settled, bright against dark steel. Troy followed her line of sight and said, "Take that tag down." No, that tag is not final. It is active until integrity clears it. I am clearing it now. You cannot clear a field condition by saying words louder, she said. You clear it by removing the hazard. Malik came over the radio again, careful, formal. Field board superintendent acknowledged message receipt. No decision transmitted yet. Troy snapped toward the radio on Denise's chest. Because you escalated past shift, now we wait while production bleeds. Good work. Denise keyed up. Board, add this note. Operations manager instructed alarm clear and feed bump against field objection. Field refused pending integrity review. Malik answered immediately. Recorded. Troy's jaw worked once. You are writing a legal transcript instead of running a unit. I am writing the chain of custody for decisions, she said. If we run this wrong, logs are what remain. For a second, no one spoke. The fan bank roared. Steam drifted in ribbons through sunlight, now clearing the tank farm. And the shell gave that same thin metallic buzz under load. Denise had heard that sound before on a crude unit years earlier, hours before a different exchanger developed a through-wall leak. Metal had a vocabulary. Management almost never learned it. By 5:52, the daylight was strong enough that the chloride halo around the seam looked almost white. Troy took out his phone and called someone on speaker without warning. Control room, this is Vance. Prepare to execute 1% feed bump on my mark. Denise stepped in, voice hard now. You execute that and I file immediate stop work. He covered the phone mic with his hand. Do that and you are done here. She held his stare. Then I am done. The answer is still no. He pulled his hand away from the phone and said into it, stand by. Then ended the call with a jab of his thumb. He looked almost surprised she had not softened. Eli spoke before he seemed ready to. Troy, the local readings were all above threshold. Maybe we should hold until integrity. Troy cut him off. Maybe you should decide whether you want a career. Denise stepped between them by half a pace, not dramatic, just enough to force Troy's attention back to her. Do not put this on him. I made the call. You made a spectacle. I made a refusal. Same thing from where I stand. She took a breath and spoke as if reading procedure aloud. Field technician refusal criteria are clear. Active leak at pressure boundary, corroborated by abnormal vibration and differential pressure trend, unresolved integrity condition and management instruction to increase stress on compromised equipment. That is a textbook refusal trigger? He folded his arms. Textbook operations shut plants down? Bad management shuts plants down, she said. Textbooks keep people alive long enough to go home. On the upper catwalk, the scaffold crew stayed clipped in and shifted clear of the south side access without fanfare, their body language tightening around the same risk everyone on the deck could now read. The foreman remained at the rail, watching. Troy pointed toward the stairwell. Go to the admin trailer, cool off. I will run this with people who understand pressure. Denise shook her head. I am not abandoning station during an active integrity dispute. You are relieved from this board support role as of now. You can relieve me from assignment. You cannot compel me to endorse unsafe operation. He leaned in, voice low. I can compel your badge to stop opening gates. She answered at the same volume. Then do it on record. He stared at her, then smiled without warmth. You think that line protects you? It protects the truth. He turned away and called toward the analyzer shelter. Malik, put Eli on assist. Denise is off panel authority until further notice. Malik did not answer for 3 seconds, which felt longer than the fan noise. Copies assist role for Eli. Denise keyed her radio. Board, note that my refusal remains in force regardless of assignment change. Malik came back, quieter. Entered. Troy swung back to Eli. Congratulations. You wanted responsibility. Here it is. You are now my acting field sign-off for E417 operations. Eli blinked. I did not ask. You have it anyway. Denise looked at him directly. You are not required to sign what you do not believe is safe. Troy snapped. She does not speak for operations leadership. She speaks for mechanism, Eli said, barely above a whisper. Troy's head turned sharply. What did you say? Eli swallowed. I said the readings are real. For a moment, Troy looked like he might explode at him, then recalculated and shifted tactics, the managerial version of force redistribution. He softened his tone by a fraction and addressed Eli like a mentor. You are early in your career. Do not let fear-based thinking define your reputation. We do controlled tests all the time. 1% bump, observe response, proceed with data. Denise cut in. Controlled tests require controlled conditions. A known leak is not controlled. Bridging a red interlock is not controlled. This is not a test. This is load escalation on degraded containment. Troy spoke over her. Eli, answer me. Can you execute a 1% bump if instructed? Eli's hand tightened around the notepad. I can execute commands. Denise heard the missing half of the sentence and knew Troy heard it too. He nodded as if he had gotten what he wanted. Good. We are moving. She keyed her radio with deliberate clarity. Board, standing objection restated at 0556. Any feed increase proceeds against written refusal and without my authorization. Board copy, Malik said. Time stamped at 0556. Troy stepped close enough that only she could hear him over the equipment. Pack your locker after shift. I am initiating removal for insubordination. She kept her face neutral, but her pulse thudded hard once in her ears. The threat was not abstract. She had a mortgage, a mother on her insurance plan, and a nephew starting trade school she helped support. Fear arrived fast and practical. She set it aside the same way she set aside heat and fatigue on long turnarounds. Acknowledge, compartmentalize, continue. She answered quietly. If your best argument is my paycheck, you already lost the technical one. He smiled thinly. Enjoy the speech while it lasts. Then he raised his voice for everyone on deck. Denise Lewis is removed from operational decision authority on E417 effective immediately. Eli Navarro will execute direction from management. Anyone interfering will be removed from site. The words rolled across, grating and steel. Nobody cheered, nobody objected. The scaffold crew froze in place. Malik stayed in the shelter doorway, headset in hand, face unreadable from this distance. Denise took out her pen, opened her log to a fresh line, and wrote in block letters while he spoke, each stroke deliberate enough for future auditors to read without interpretation. 557 manager announced removal of field tech for refusal to increase load on red-tagged equipment. Replacement assigned. She tore the carbon copy free and handed it to Eli. Keep that with your notes. He took it automatically. Denise, keep it. Troy saw the handoff. What is that? Documentation, she said. You are done documenting. No, she said. I am done complying with unsafe orders. Different sentence. He looked at her for a long second, then pointed toward the emergency station platform, near the deluge pull handle. Stand there and stay out of the way. She considered refusing even that, then chose the stronger position. Remain present visible, and close enough to respond if the pattern accelerated. I will stand at emergency response station and monitor. Do not touch my board. Noted. She walked to the platform, clipped her radio to shoulder height, checked the deluge handle travel path, and verified the nearest dry chemical extinguisher seal was intact. If he wanted her sidelined, she would be sidelined in the most operationally useful place on the deck. From there she could see E417, the red tag, the transmitter light, and Eli by the shelter rail with his notepad open and pen hovering. Troy stood beside him, one hand on the rail, the other on his phone, already composing the next order that would pretend procedure had been followed. Denise keyed her radio one more time, voice even, no tremor. Board, emergency station is manned. Standing field refusal remains in effect. If commanded feed increase occurs, mark it as management override. Malik answered after a beat. Copy. Override notation template prepared. Troy heard that and barked. You are not writing override. You are writing routine adjustment. Malik did not reply. Denise watched the seam glisten once more in the morning light, that faint breathing pulse at the old repair line, and felt the unit settle into a new kind of silence, the kind that came when everyone understood the next decision had stopped being technical and started being evidence. Denise watched Troy angle his radio away from her and key the channel reserved for command traffic. Board, this is Operations Manager. Enter routine adjustment mode. 1% feed increase to hydro treater charge now. He said it with the clipped calm of a man narrating normal work, as if changing the label could change the load on damaged steel. Malik's answer came thin through Denise's shoulder speaker. Manager, field refusal is active on E417. Request superintendent confirmation before set point change. You have confirmation from me, Troy said. Execute. Denise keyed in immediately. Board, mark this as management override against active red tag and integrity hold recommendation. Troy swung toward her. Stop talking on my channel. She kept her voice level, then stop issuing unsafe orders. Eli stood beside the shelter rail with the notepad she had handed him, pen still poised over the carbon copy, eyes flicking between the DCS screen glow and the seam that kept breathing in faint pulses. He looked young in that moment, not in age, but in exposure, like somebody who had finally stepped from training scenarios into the real cost of hierarchy. He keyed his own radio with a tremor he could not hide. Board, this is Eli. Confirm feed bump command source. Source is Operations Manager, Malik replied. Command queued, awaiting second authorization. Troy snapped his fingers once at Eli. You are second authorization. Give it. Denise felt the knot in her ribs harden. Eli, you are allowed to refuse. Troy spoke over her. Eli, do your job. The fan bank behind them droned at its constant pitch, but beneath it the exchanger's metallic buzz had thickened into a rougher note, a low tremor that seemed to ride the grating and climb through Denise's boots. She checked the fixed transmitter again. Red LED steady. She took one step to the emergency panel, lifted the clear cover, and rested her hand near the deluge pull without touching it. By 6:07, sunlight had burned through the dawn haze, and every stain on the shell was visible. Eli swallowed, then keyed up. Board second authorizations acknowledged. Malik did not respond for a full second. Copy. Executing 1% bump in 3, 2, 1. Set point moved. No explosion, no dramatic jolt. Just process numbers beginning to climb in quiet increments that looked harmless to anyone who did not know what they coupled to. Denise heard the difference before she saw it. The flutter at the seam sharpened into a fast, insect-like trill for 2 beats, then settled into a deeper buzz. She lifted her meter and pointed it at the repair band. Surface temperature climbed another 3 degrees in less than 20 seconds. "Board field," she said. "Report live response." Malik answered quickly now, his voice turning technical, maybe because technical language was the only safe place left. "Delta P rising, 2.8 to 2.92 bar and still moving. Vibration trend crossed prior peak. Outlet temperature oscillation widened to 4.1 degrees. Denise looked at Troy. Coupling confirmed. "Hold and derate now?" He did not look at her. "Continue observation window. We need data stability for 5 minutes. "That is not a stability window," she said. "That is dwell time on a damaged boundary." He ignored her and keyed command traffic again. "Maintenance? Status on vibration interlock impairment request?" A new voice crackled in. "Senior Maintenance Tech, Romero. Bypass jumper is prepared at local cabinet, awaiting manager approval to install temporary bridge under impairment form." Denise felt her jaw lock. "Do not bridge that interlock. It is the one remaining automatic brake." Troy answered Romero instead. "Approved. Install bridge. Code it temporary. I will sign." Romero hesitated. "Need field witness signature." Troy pointed at Eli without turning. "You have your witness." Eli stared at him. "I have not reviewed the form." "You are reviewing it now," Troy said. Denise keyed her radio so hard the push-to-talk clicked twice. "Board, log this explicitly. Manager ordered vibration interlock bypass on red-tagged leaking exchanger under active objection." Malik said, "Logged." Romero came back 15 seconds later, voice resigned. "Bridge installed. Interlock status now impaired. Alarm remains active, trip inhibited." That sentence changed the texture of the deck more than any siren could have. Denise felt dread turn from forecast to structure. They had removed the system's right to save them automatically and replaced it with confidence and paperwork. "Eli," she said, quieter now, forcing him to focus on her and not Troy. "Write the exact time interlock was bridged." He wrote it. His pen dug so hard the page almost tore. Troy looked pleased for the first time that morning. "There. We have flexibility. Continue run." Denise gave him one last compliant path. Clear and complete. Derate 18%. Start spare train lineup. Isolate E417. Notify integrity for emergent UT map. We can still walk this back. He shook his head once. Not happening. Over the next 7 minutes, the process did what process always did. It answered input with output. Delta P crept. Vibration held high and rose in spikes. Outlet pressure began showing needle shimmer that never settled into a clean line. Denise heard Malik call out numbers in clipped intervals. Heard Eli repeat them into his notes. Heard Troy keep saying, "Stay the course," as if repetition were control. At 6:15, the seam's weep line changed from pulse wet to intermittent mist. It was not a spray yet. It was worse, because it meant the crack mouth was opening fractionally under each load cycle and atomizing a film at the edge. Worried as Denise stepped to the rail and shouted up to the upper catwalk, where the scaffold foreman and 2 permit inspectors were staged near the inactive scaffold access, observing the unit, but not working a live scaffold. "South Bank, clear the exchanger row now. Full clear, no debate." The foreman did not ask permission from Troy. "You heard her. Move out now." Troy barked. You do not command contractors. Denise did not take her eyes off the men clipping off and retreating along the catwalk. I just did. He keyed his radio again. Board, add another 0.5%. Malik answered. Manager, vibration is already above red with interlock impaired. Recommend hold. Add it, Troy said. Silence, then Eli, almost inaudible. Board, execute. The set point moved. This time even Troy flinched at the sound. A low groan rolled through the exchanger bank. Not loud, but broad. Like steel, speaking through its full length. Denise felt it in her sternum, a pressure wave sensation more than a noise. She glanced at the transmitter housing. Red light still steady, as indifferent as a metronome. By 6:21, the sun was high enough to throw hard shadows under the pipe rack, and the hydrocarbon odor around E417 was no longer faint. Denise stepped onto the emergency platform and keyed command traffic without asking. All stations, this is Field Technician Lewis. Potential pressure boundary escalation at E417. Non-essential personnel clear South Hydro Treater Deck and move to designated muster corridors. This is a precautionary protective action. Troy lunged one step toward her. Stand down. She kept transmitting. Repeat. Clear South Deck now. From the control room, a different voice finally cut in. Shift Superintendent Harlan Price. Breathless and angry that he was late to his own decision. Who authorized that call? Denise answered first. I did, based on active leak growth, rising delta P, sustained red vibration, and interlock bypass. Troy keyed over her. She is out of authority and disrupting operations. Price came back after a beat that told Denise he was reading logs in real time. All right, hold current feed. Nobody changes set point until I'm on unit. Copy hold, Malik said immediately. Troy said, Negative, we are mid-adjustment and stable. Denise stared at him. Stable is a lie. He did not meet her eyes. Stable enough. Then the pattern tightened. Denise heard it click into place like gears. Board field, Malik said, urgency rising for the first time. Outlet pressure gauge is showing needle flutter plus minus 6 psi, not instrument noise. Repeat, not instrument noise. Denise answered. Confirmed expected pre-failure oscillation. Hold and isolate now. Troy keyed in. Board maintain rate. Price shouted through static. Vance, I said hold. No one finished the argument because the exchanger did. 8 seconds after the last feed adjustment settled, a metallic chirp snapped from the shell, sharp and high, like a wrench striking a rail. Denise's head turned toward the seam before thought caught up. 21 seconds later, a low-frequency groan spread through the pipe rack, deeper than before, and the grating under her boots shivered in a long wave. 34 seconds later, Eli yelled from the shelter rail, voice cracking, Outlet needle is hunting hard, harder. Denise was already moving. She hit her radio. Emergency condition. Emergency condition at E417. Prepare isolation. At 6:25:02, the repaired seam opened. The sound was wrong first. Not a bang, but a zipper rip tearing down steel length, fast and unmistakable. A white jet punched sideways from the shell, dense and violent, slicing through hot air toward the heater alley. The plume struck a structural beam, split, and atomized into a cloud that flashed bright at the edge where it met ignition source. Fire did not appear as a movie fireball. It arrived as a hard orange sheet and pressure that slammed outward in a single, brutal shove. The control room windows above the shelter burst in a cascade of safety glass cubes. Alarm horns detonated across the unit at once, layered tones folding over each other until the whole deck sounded like a metal throat screaming. Denise felt overpressure hit her chest and shoulders, pushing her half a step sideways into the rail. Dust and insulation rained down in a gray-white curtain. "Deluge! Deluge now!" she shouted and pulled the handle full travel. Water thundered from overhead rings a heartbeat later, a wide cone crashing onto steel and fire edge, turning vapor to rolling white clouds that erased sight lines every few seconds. She keyed her radio through the roar. Unit emergency, hydro treater south deck. E417 shell breach with fire. Initiate ESD. Dispatch fire brigade and medical." Malik came back coughing, voice broken by static. ESD initiated from board. Feed valves closing. Hydrogen recycle tripping. I repeat, emergency shutdown in progress. From her left, 2 contractors who had been descending the far stair at her warning were on the deck, both down but moving, one clutching his arm, the other dazed and trying to stand into the spray. No graphic scene, just shock, heat, and bad footing. Denise ran to them in 3 strides, crouched low under the deluge sheet, and grabbed the nearer man by his harness D-ring. "Stay down. Breathe through your sleeve. We are moving to the stair shadow." He nodded once, eyes wide. A steel fragment clanged off the grating 2 meters away, then another. Falling insulation mats slapped wetly into pooled water. Denise dragged the first contractor to the lee of a column, went back for the second with Eli suddenly beside her, face gray. Notepad gone. "Help me with his shoulder," she said. Eli knelt without argument. Together they moved the second man clear of direct spray and debris path. Troy stood 10 meters off near the shelter. Frozen, suit-clean hard hat, now streaked with soot and wet fiber. Radio in hand, but silent, staring at the ruptured shell, as if waiting for it to reverse itself. "Vance," Denise shouted. "Call head count and route access for responders." He blinked, then keyed up with a voice that had lost all its authority edges. "Command, this is Vance. We have a breach and injuries on south deck. Need immediate response." Price cut in, no hesitation now. "Fire brigade is rolling. Keep lanes clear. Confirm isolation status." Malik answered from the board, steadier than anyone on deck. Primary feed block valves at 70% closed and traveling. Recycle compressor tripped. Heater fuel cut confirmed. Flare header pressure rising. Denise checked the contractors again, both conscious, both breathing. She looked at Eli. "Stay with them. Do not let them stand." He nodded rapidly. "Got it." The flame front at the exchanger mouth shrank under deluge and fuel starvation, then flared once more as trapped hydrocarbons burned off in a ragged tongue. Denise watched the seam, now split open along the old repair line exactly where the chloride halo had outlined weakness hours earlier. Metal edges glowed dull through steam, then dimmed as cooling water took hold. 3 minutes after rupture, the first fire brigade team hit the deck in full gear, advancing a foam line through drifting vapor. Denise met their lead at the stair landing and pointed with a flat hand. "Source is E417 South Seam. 2 injured contractors stabilized at column C4. No one trapped on upper catwalk. Scaffold foremen and inspectors cleared before event." The lead firefighter gave a quick nod and signaled his team forward. Only then did Denise allow herself one full breath. It came in shaky and hot, tasting of wet insulation, diesel soot, and the metallic tang of ruptured process equipment. She turned toward the shelter. Troy had sunk onto the bottom stair, elbows on knees, her radio hanging loose, watching responders take over the scene he had called routine less than 20 minutes earlier. Denise looked once at the torn seam, once at the red tag stub still tied to the ladder cage and whipping in deluge spray, and keyed her radio for the log that would outlast the smoke. Board field, record final. Predicted failure mode occurred after management override and interlock bypass. Emergency response active. Field technician Lewis, remaining on scene for witness statement and accountability support. Malik answered through static and sprinkler roar. Board copy Denise. Logged exactly as transmitted. The words were procedural, almost flat, and that flatness steadied her more than comfort would have. Procedure meant structure, and structure was what kept chaos from turning into a second failure. Denise stayed at column C4 with Eli and the two contractors, while Fire Brigade advanced on the exchanger mouth, laying foam where the deluge could not fully smother residual burn. One contractor, Rafik, kept trying to sit up and point back toward the scaffold access. The other, Miller, had singed sleeves and a shaking left hand but clear speech. Both were in pain. Both were alive. Denise repeated that fact in her head while she checked them for orientation and breathing cadence. "Stay with me," she told Rafik. "Name, company, and where you are." Rafik Khan, Axis Scaffold, South Deck Hydrotreater. He coughed and grimaced. "Thought we were clear." "You were clear enough to survive," Denise said. "Do not move until medics lift you." Eli held Miller's shoulder steady against the column and kept his own breathing under control by counting out loud with the pulse checks. 78, 79, 80. His voice cracked once, then steadied. He looked at Denise with the expression of someone who had crossed a line he could not uncross. "I signed that second authorization." "Right now, keep him talking," she said. "We handle signatures in the debrief." At 6:31, the emergency shutdown sequence completed in layers. Feed block valves showed shut. Recycle compressor was down. Heater fuel isolation had held. The flame at E417 fell from ragged orange tongues to intermittent flicker around hot metal and pooled residue. Foam blanketed the deck drains. Alarm horns dropped from full warble to intermittent pulses as systems transitioned from active trip to latched emergency state. Over the radio, Incident Command assigned zones and routes with clipped precision. Hot zone at South Exchanger Bank, warm zone at Analyzer Shelter, casualty collection at Stair Tower East Landing. By 6:38, medics had both contractors on stretchers and moving toward the unit gate under escort. Denise stood as they lifted out and finally felt her knees protest from the force hit and the drag effort. She ignored it and moved to the command knot forming near the shelter. Shift Superintendent Harlan Price, Fire Brigade Lead Ortega, Safety Coordinator Annika Bose, Maintenance Tech Romero, and Troy Vance standing half a step outside the circle like a man uncertain whether titles still translated into authority. Price pointed toward Denise as she approached. "You stay. I need sequence from you first," Troy cut in. Sequence is obvious. Sequence. Sudden seam failure during routine adjustment. Denise looked at him once, then at Price. It was not sudden, and it was not routine. Price held up a hand. One at a time. "Denise, start with first observed defect and move forward by timestamp." She gave it exactly that way. 5:18 initial visual weep and abnormal acoustic note. 5:31 manager notified. 5:43 standing safety objection logged. Repeated live readings, red vibration status, recommended D rate and isolation. 6:07 1% feed increase under manager order. 6:15 leak morphology, change to intermittent mist. 6:18:02 seam rupture. She included the interlock bypass order and the witness signature pressure. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She used mechanism and clocks. Romero spoke without looking at Troy. Bypass bridge installed at 6:11 under temporary impairment form. I asked for field witness. Eli was designated by manager. Annika wrote fast, then looked up. Where is that form now? Romero tapped his chest pocket. Original carbon on me. Duplicate in maintenance cabinet B. Do not hand it to anyone except me or legal, Annika said. From this minute, litigation hold applies to all incident documents. Troy stepped forward. Let's not use courtroom words while we're triaging. Annika met his eyes. Courtroom words started when an interlock was bypassed on leaking equipment with a documented field refusal. Then, no one answered her. At 6:52, they moved into the temporary incident room in the hydro treater admin trailer. Wet boots squeaking on vinyl, radios still chattering from outside. Malik joined by speaker from the board console because he couldn't leave the shutdown panel. Eli sat along the side wall with his notepad and Denise's carbon copy on his knee, staring at both like they were evidence and confession at the same time. Price drew a timeline across a whiteboard and began the first rational accounting. Human impact first. 2 contractor injuries, both transported, both conscious at departure. No fatalities confirmed. 1 control room laceration from blown glass, treated on site. Accountability check is complete. All personnel present. He wrote the numbers, boxed them, then moved to operations. Unit status, hydro treater down under emergency isolation, adjacent train in protective hold. No restart window until integrity clears containment and fire marshal releases scene. He turned to maintenance. Mechanical damage? Romero read from his field notes. E417 shell split along prior repair seam, approximately 1.6 meters visible opening. South side support lugs distorted. Insulation and jacketing loss across roughly 12 meters of bank. 2 instrument impulse lines severed. Cable tray heat damage above exchanger row. Control room south glazing, blown out by overpressure. Price looked at process engineer Lena Cho, who had just entered with a laptop and soot on her cuffs. Production consequence. Lena set the laptop down, rotated it so the room could see trend and inventory models, and spoke in numbers. Immediate deferred production estimate is 2,600 barrels per hour, while hydro treater is offline. If outage is 7 days, deferred volume is 436,000 barrels of unfinished stream impact adjusted. If outage extends to 19 days, deferred equivalent reaches 1.18 million barrels gross movement across blend plan, with about 62,000 barrels direct diesel target loss in current cycle. Troy shook his head. 19 days is alarmist. We can weld and return. Romero answered before anyone else. Not with this metallurgy. Not with a rupture at prior repair and potential hydrogen attack in heat-affected zone. We need full NDE, likely shell section replacement, post-weld heat treatment plan, and regulator review. Lena added, supply chain on a coated shell section is not overnight. Price wrote 2 shutdown scenarios on the board anyway. Optimistic 12 days, constrained 19 days. He underlined the second twice. By 7:20, the first environmental status came in from utilities. Flare had run above permitted assist steam opacity window during emergency depressuring. Not catastrophic, but not clean. Compliance would have to self-report exceedance minutes and composition estimate. Annika took that call on speaker, listened, then translated for the room. Permit threshold crossed. We are drafting state notification now. Add this to incident chain. Emergency flare exceedance, tied to rupture response and shutdown. Denise caught Troy's reaction at that line. He closed his eyes for one long second, then opened them and fixed on the whiteboard like he could negotiate with marker ink. The second accounting pass started at 8:05 with finance on conference line. Controller Ames asked for direct cost placeholders while incident command still held the scene. Price gave conservative ranges. Ames pushed for tighter bounds. Lena and Romero refused to fake precision. Finally, they agreed on a preliminary direct loss bracket with explicit uncertainty. Equipment and emergency response, 2.8 to 4.1 million. Production and margin impacts in 8-figure range pending outage length. Contractor claims reserved. Ames asked whether insurance would absorb most of it. Risk manager Celia Trent joined the call and answered in a tone so careful it sounded like steel. Carrier has been notified. They will issue reservation of rights language if safeguards were intentionally bypassed. If documented override and interlock impairment are confirmed, coverage can be contested in part. Preserve all logs, radios, forms, and camera files now. No edits, no rewrites, no clean copies. That sentence changed the room, more than the fire alarm had. Money had entered in legal grammar. Troy leaned toward the speakerphone. Celia, we were managing a temporary condition, that's standard. Celia did not soften. Standard does not include overriding a documented red tag objection and bridging a vibration trip without integrity concurrence. I am not arguing facts on an open bridge. I am instructing preservation. Annika slid a printed form across the table. Legal hold acknowledgement. Sign now. One by one they signed. Denise signed with wet knuckles and a pen that skipped once over dried foam residue on her hand. Eli signed last, eyes down. Troy hesitated, then signed with a hard stroke that tore the paper fibers. At 8:47, corporate counsel connected for the statutory notification plan. The guidance was blunt. Federal worker safety notification within required reporting window due to hospitalization, state environmental notice for permit exceedance, internal board alert due to potential willful serious exposure, and immediate witness statement capture before shift end. Counsel asked if any party had ordered operation against a written field refusal. Silence stretched until Price answered. Yes, he said. Order sequence and timestamps are in the shift log and radio archive. Counsel replied, Then this is no longer a pure equipment failure file. It is an operational decision file with evidentiary controls. Treat every document accordingly. By 9:30, investigators began controlled walkdown of the cooled zone. Denise accompanied Annika and Ortega through the south deck in hard hats and fresh monitors, stepping around hose runs and foam puddles. The rupture line was unmistakable up close. The old repair seam, peeled open with a jagged, zipper-like geometry, exactly where chloride staining had framed the weakness at dawn. Denise photographed it under investigator direction with scale card and orientation arrows. Annika bagged a section of failed lagging, labeled it, logged chain of custody number, and sealed it into Evidence Tote 04. Romero tagged the bypass jumper removed from the local cabinet and logged that as Evidence Tote 05. Every item got a number, a time, a signature. At 10:12, Malik reported from the board that archived historian files had been mirrored to secure storage and checksum verified. Voice recordings from command channel were copied read-only. Eli handed over his notepad and Denise's carbon copy to Annika, who scanned each page in front of them and stored originals in tamper-evident sleeves. Physical evidence, external communications, loaded glances, strange details. Everything that could drift into rumor was being pinned to records. At 10:44, the hospital update arrived. Both contractors had burn injuries and concussion monitoring, stable condition, admitted for treatment. No one in the room celebrated. They just released breath they had been rationing since rupture. Price began final morning briefing with the clarity of a man who knew denial had run out of room. Here's where we stand. Hydro treater remains down. Preliminary outage planning basis is 19 days pending metallurgy report. Direct loss working figure currently 16.4 million, with deferred production impacts still updating. 2 hospitalized contractors. Regulatory notifications in progress. Insurer notified with reservation risk due to intentional safeguard bypass. Internal disciplinary review starts today. He turned to Denise. You are relieved from emergency duty for statement processing and medical check. Do not leave site. She nodded once. Then Price turned to Troy. He did not raise his voice. Effective now, you are removed from operational authority pending investigation. Turn over your radio, badge access, and incident notes to safety. For the first time all morning, Troy looked older than his title. He set the radio on the table. The plastic clicked once against laminate. He removed his badge and placed it beside it, then his notebook. No speech, no defense in the room that still smelled faintly of smoke and wet steel. Denise watched the items line up. Radio, badge, notebook, 3 objects that had carried command an hour earlier. She felt no triumph, only a hard, exhausted certainty. The plant had tried to buy 6 hours of schedule. The invoice had already arrived in injuries, glass, foam, legal holds, and a whiteboard full of numbers that would keep growing. Outside, through the trailer window, the hydro treater sat under drifting steam with E417 wrapped in fire hose and caution tape. Inside, the reckoning kept moving in timestamps, signatures, and costs that did not care about rank. Outside, through the trailer window, the hydro treater sat under drifting steam with E417 wrapped in fire hose and caution tape. Inside, the reckoning kept moving in timestamps, signatures, and costs that did not care about rank. Price slid a second form across the table, this one from Human Resources with legal copied at the bottom. Troy, this is immediate suspension pending misconduct review. You are not to contact board operators, maintenance, or contractors about today's event. Hand over company phone. Troy's mouth opened, then closed. He set the phone down beside his badge. Annika bagged it, labeled it Device Hold 02, and read the tag aloud while Denise watched. Collected 1049, chain starts with safety. Nothing vanished into pockets now. By 11:30, Denise sat in occupational health while a nurse cleaned fiberglass dust from a shallow cut at her hairline and checked her hearing after the pressure wave. Eli sat 2 chairs away with an ice pack on his wrist, not from impact, but from gripping steel rail through the blast. He kept staring at his palms. I heard you say no, he said finally, voice low. I heard every reason. I still keyed it. Denise kept her eyes on the monitor where her pulse settled back under 100. You were cornered. Next time, you refuse earlier. He nodded once, then handed her a folded sheet. It was his own written addendum, timed and signed, stating Troy directed him to act as witness on the bypass form, under threat to his career. He had not left that sentence half-finished this time. At 13:05, the first regulator call connected on speaker in the incident room. State Environmental Desk logged the flare exceedance notice, asked for duration and composition estimate, then issued a case number Denise wrote in block print beside the shutdown timeline. 10 minutes later, the Federal Worker Safety Intake Line confirmed reportability due to hospitalizations and requested preservation of radio archives, impairment paperwork, and command logs. Price answered each request with file names and storage paths instead of vague promises. Malik, still at the board, patched in and confirmed the historian mirror checksum values, character by character. When the intake officer asked whether any safeguard had been intentionally bypassed, the room went quiet for one breath. Price answered, yes. Vibration trip on E417 was bridged at 6:11 under manager order. The officer said, understood, and read back the statement for the record. By late afternoon, the preserved items began to come back as facts instead of fragments. Integrity Engineering opened evidence tote 04 with 2 witnesses present and photographed the lagging cross-section. Chloride crystals were visible in the wet insulation layer exactly where Denise had marked suspected CUI at the south lower quadrant. Tote 05 held the bypass jumper with fresh tool marks and continuity proof of the trip defeat. The camera files Denise shot at dawn, including the pulsing weep line and red LED, were hash verified and matched their original timestamps. The strange details she had flagged under pressure, the metallic flutter, periodic mist, outlet needle shimmer, and hydrocarbon odor shift, mapped cleanly onto the trend data and the rupture clock. Mechanism had a paper trail now. At 18:20, Price reconvened a smaller room, safety, legal, operations, and the union representative for field staff. Troy was present with counsel, no radio, no authority posture left. Hitreet. The screen showed synchronized evidence, audio clip of his run-the-bump order, maintenance channel approval for impairment bridge, and board log entry marked override against active refusal. Counsel for the company asked one question that cut through all spin. Mr. Vance, did you read Tag 91-HT-447 before ordering feed increase? Troy looked at the table edge. I was briefed verbally. That is not an answer. Long pause. No. The union rep did not smile. She only circled that response on her pad and slid a copy to legal. 3 days passed before the insurer's reservation of rights letter arrived, and it landed like a second blast, without heat. Celia read it aloud in the same trailer where the first timeline had been drawn. Coverage potentially limited due to intentional safeguard bypass, operation against documented field objection, and impairment control deficiencies. Finance sat in silence while she reached page 5 and the projected uninsured exposure line. Then came the compliance callback from the internal email chain Troy had hoped would stay buried. Legal had every forwarded warning. Denise's objection, Malik's logged hold requests, and the copied note to Risk before noon that operating degraded pressure equipment had crossed a willful threshold. The delayed consequence had matured exactly as Denise predicted. The unit had been losing long before Steele opened. At the formal disciplinary hearing in week 2, the room felt less like corporate theater and more like an engineering viva with legal penalties attached. The board chair asked Denise to state her credential line for the record. She did not embellish. "My name is Denise Lewis. I am a senior process technician with 16 years in hot oil and hydrogen service. I was paid to catch failure precursors and act before harm." She walked the chain in plain causality. Fouling drove delta P. Delta P increased pulsation. Pulsation amplified vibration. Vibration cycled the weakened weld zone in hydrogen service. Interlock bypass removed automatic protection. Feed increase accelerated crack growth. "He thought title could overrule mechanism," she said. "Mechanism did not care." Troy's counsel argued schedule pressure, ambiguous risk, and emergency judgment. Then legal played the audio where Troy called the hazard drama and ordered routine labeling for an override. The room turned still. The chair asked for final recommendation from safety. Annika answered, "Gross misconduct, willful override, falsified impairment context, retaliatory removal of refusing technician." Finance added clawback figures already prepared, bonus reversal, severance denial, and reimbursement offset clauses triggered by misconduct finding. The vote was unanimous. Price read the decision without flourish. "Troy Vance is terminated for gross misconduct effective immediately." Security collected his visitor pass at the door on the way out. The civil and criminal tracks moved next, slower but just as mechanical. In county court, under fluorescent light and no cameras, Troy entered a plea to negligent endangerment tied to falsified impairment paperwork and unsafe override actions. Denise attended because subpoena required it, sat in the second row, and answered only what was asked. Rafik and Miller's counsel filed their civil complaint the same afternoon, anchored to timestamps, archived audio, and the bypass form chain of custody. No one could claim missing records. Even the scaffold foreman who had looked down at his gloves on the deck testified that he heard Denise order a clear and heard Troy challenge her authority after the leak worsened. Malik testified to his pauses on the radio and why he paused. Fear of retaliation. Then fear of rupture. He said both under oath. On the first Monday after the 19th day of outage planning was confirmed, Price called Denise into the operations conference room at 6:10, the same hour the unit had started to go wrong weeks earlier. HR sat in, plus union, plus integrity engineering. Price placed 2 envelopes on the table. First, reinstatement with full back pay from removal time. Second, appointment letter. Operations integrity lead, hydro processing assets, effective today. Denise read the title twice, then the scope. Refusal protocol authority, impairment approval gate, and mandatory sign-off on red tag dispositions. It was not symbolic. It rewired decision rights where they had failed. She signed and HR countersigned in blue ink while the sun came up over the tank farm. At 7 o'clock, she stood on the rebuilt deck with Malik, Eli, Romero, Annika, and the new shift crew for a toolbox talk beside a replacement exchanger shell still smelling of fresh coating. She held up copies of the preserved tags and one photo of the old seam before rupture. "This is why we do not translate warning into weakness," she said. "We had a leak, a red vibration alarm, rising differential pressure, and a documented refusal. Every layer that should have slowed risk was treated as optional. None of it was optional." Eli spoke next, unprompted. If you feel pressured to sign, call it out in the moment. Silence is not neutrality. Malik added, if board log says hold, hold means hold. When the meeting broke, Denise stayed a moment at the rail where the old red tag had once snapped in deluge spray. The new transmitter glowed green. The deck still hummed, but the sound profile was clean, expected, boring in the best way. Price stepped beside her and said, they tried to save 6 hours. Denise watched steam drift over steel and answered, they bought 19 days of ruin. He nodded once and walked back to the stairwell. She clipped her radio to her shoulder, checked the first round checklist, and stepped toward the exchanger bank with the same pace she had used before dawn on the day of the rupture. Only now, the rule sat in policy, payroll, and court record instead of one technician's refusal. Physics outranked hierarchy, and this plant would read the red tag before it read the schedule.